Hello guys, welcome to our channel. Before we continue this story, kindly subscribe to help feed this poor girl. Thank you. The night was quiet, but in the house of Thomas Okeke, silence carried shame. He sat alone in his compound, staring at the moon as the mocking words of the villagers echoed in his mind. Men admired his strength and laughed about his big manhood, yet he carried a secret heavier than the earth. He had 4 wives, each chosen with care, but none of them had given him a child. It was as though his blood had been locked away from the future. He remembered the day his last wife, Grace, broke down in tears before him. She had fallen on her knees, begging for forgiveness she could not explain. "Maybe it is me, maybe my womb is cursed," she wept, but Thomas had no answer. His other wives, Mary, Ruth, and Anna, had faced the same torment. The villagers whispered that his wives were barren, but the women knew it was not true. Each time they went to the midwives, they were told their wombs were healthy. Something else was wrong, something beyond flesh. That night, as Thomas sat under the moon, he thought about his late father's words. On his deathbed, his father had whispered, "You will carry a burden not meant for ordinary men. Blood will call you, and cries of the unborn will follow you." At the time, Thomas had dismissed it as the ranting of a dying old man. But now, after years of emptiness and shame, those words felt like a curse placed on his head. Deep in his heart, Thomas sensed that his problem was not ordinary. But he could not imagine the darkness waiting for him in the forbidden forest, or the chilling truth that his manhood was never meant for children of his own blood, but for voices of the dead yet to rest. The next morning, Thomas walked through the village square, his shoulders heavy with shame. Men of his age already had sons running about, carrying baskets for their mothers or learning the ways of the farm. Some of those boys even called him uncle, yet he knew none of them carried his blood. Old women in the square shook their heads when they saw him, whispering behind their wrappers. To them, Thomas was a man blessed with wealth and strength but cursed without a son to inherit it. At home, his wives no longer quarreled with each other. In the early years, they had fought bitterly, each trying to prove she would be the one to give him a child. But after years of empty wombs, they no longer saw each other as rivals. Instead, they shared their pain in silence. Sometimes at night, Thomas would hear Anna crying softly. Ruth often stayed longer in the church, praying until her knees ached. Mary had stopped eating much, while Grace, the youngest, avoided looking at him at all. Their silence was worse than their quarrels. One evening, an elder named Obina visited Thomas. He was an old man, his back bent like a bow, but his eyes were sharp with knowledge. He sat in Thomas's compound and watched him for a long time before speaking. "Thomas, do you know why you have no sons?" the elder asked. Thomas looked at him in confusion. "It is not your wives. And it is not your strength." Obina continued. "The blood of war follows you. There is a voice you have not heard. Until you hear it, your house will remain empty." Thomas felt his body grow cold. He wanted to ask what Obina meant, but before he could, the old man stood and left, leaning on his staff. That night, Thomas could not sleep. The words of Obina echoed in his mind, pulling him closer to a secret he did not yet understand. Days passed, but Obina's words refused to leave Thomas's mind. "The blood of war follows you. There is a voice you have not heard." What did that mean? He had never gone to war, though he had heard stories of the civil conflict that swallowed lives long before he was born. His father, who had been a soldier, never spoke much about it, except for the strange warning he gave before his death. One night, Thomas dreamt of children crying. Their small voices filled his ears like echoes in a cave, their hands reaching out to him from the darkness. He tried to touch them, but each time he moved closer, they vanished into smoke. Then he saw a shadow of his father standing among them, his eyes hollow, his lips repeating the same words, "Blood will call you, and cries of the unborn will follow you." Thomas woke in fear, his body wet with sweat. The sound of those children's cries lingered in his heart, so real that it almost felt as if they were in his compound. The next day, Thomas gathered courage and visited Obina's hut. The elder sat outside, grinding herbs. "I saw them," Thomas confessed in a low voice, his eyes trembling. "Children, crying, in my dream. And my father was there." Obina nodded slowly, as if he already knew. "It is time you go to the forest," the old man said. "There is an oracle deep inside the trees. He will tell you why the spirits torment you. But be warned, what you will hear may shatter your heart." Thomas's hands shook as he listened. The forbidden forest was a place no ordinary man dared to enter. People said strange lights appeared there at night, and those who went in often did not return. Yet for Thomas, shame was heavier than fear. If an oracle held the answer, then he would go, even if it meant his life. The path to the forbidden forest lay beyond the farms, where thick trees stood like silent guards. Thomas had walked past that place many times, but never had he felt its weight until now. The villagers said spirits roamed there, wandering souls from old wars and broken families. Some swore they heard babies crying among the trees at night, though no one had ever found them. On the morning he decided to go, Thomas told no one. He left his compound before dawn, carrying only a small calabash of water. The dew was heavy on the grass, and the cool air clung to his skin. As he stepped into the first line of trees, he felt a strange coldness spread through him. The forest was alive with whispers, though no wind moved the branches. He walked deeper, guided only by the fading sound of Obina's warning in his mind. The forest grew darker, and his heart pounded. Then suddenly, he heard the cries of children. Soft at first, then louder, filling every corner of the forest. His knees grew weak. He had heard those cries before, in his dream. He stumbled forward, his breath heavy, until he reached a clearing where a small hut stood. Smoke rose gently from its roof. An old man stepped out, his hair white like ashes, his eyes piercing as though they could see through Thomas's soul. "You have come," the man said in a voice that shook the ground. "The vessel of the forgotten." Thomas froze, unable to speak. The oracle turned and entered the hut, motioning for him to follow. Thomas's legs felt like stone, but he stepped inside, not knowing that the truth waiting for him would mark the beginning of his blood journey. Inside the hut, the air was heavy with the smell of burning herbs and strange oils. Skulls of animals hung from the roof, their hollow eyes watching every movement. The oracle sat on a low stool, his bony hands resting on a staff carved with symbols Thomas had never seen before. A single flame burned at the center of the room, casting shadows that danced like spirits on the walls. The oracle studied Thomas in silence for a long time before speaking. "You are strong in body, but your seed does not belong to this world," he said. Thomas swallowed hard, his palms sweating. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. The oracle closed his eyes and began to chant, his words deep and old, older than the forest itself. Then he looked at Thomas again. "Your manhood was marked before your birth. It was given not for sons of your blood, but for cries of those who died too early. You are a vessel, chosen to carry their voices until they find rest." Thomas's heart sank. No, he muttered, shaking his head. "I only want a child. My own child." His voice broke as he spoke. The oracle's eyes softened, but his words were firm. "It is not a curse of flesh. It is a curse of spirit. Your father's hands carried blood during the war. He took lives, and the cries of those children have followed his line. Until you make peace with them, your house will remain empty." Thomas felt as though the ground had shifted beneath him. The weight of generations pressed on his chest, crushing his breath. He wanted to scream, but no sound came. Instead, he fell to his knees, staring at the small flame in the hut. For the first time in his life, he realized his shame was not just his, it was a shadow of his father's sins, and he was the one chosen to carry it. The oracle rose from his stool and placed a hand on Thomas's shoulder. His touch was cold, almost lifeless. "Do not weep yet," he said. "There is a path, but it is not an easy one. To break the chain, you must journey where the cries were first born. You must face the spirit of the children, and you must give them what they were denied." Thomas's lips trembled. "What do they want from me?" The oracle looked into the flame, his eyes reflecting the fire. "They want blood. They want sacrifice. They want to be remembered." The words struck Thomas like a spear. How could he, a man who only wanted one son, be asked to offer more blood? He shook his head, his chest rising and falling quickly. "I cannot kill," he whispered. "I cannot give blood." The oracle's face hardened. "You must decide. If you turn back now, your name will die with you. No heir will carry your blood. No one will keep your memory alive." Thomas lowered his head, his mind torn between fear and desperation. He thought of Grace, his youngest wife, who prayed every night to carry his child. He thought of the laughter of the men in the village who mocked him, calling him a man only in flesh but empty in legacy. And then he thought of his father, whose shadow still haunted him. Finally, Thomas spoke, his voice firm though his body shook. "Tell me what I must do." The oracle nodded slowly, as though he had expected the answer. "Go to the old battleground near the river," he said. "When the moon is full, carry a white cock, palm oil, and your own blood. There, you will call them, and they will answer." Thomas felt the walls of the hut close in. The cries he had heard in his dreams suddenly returned, echoing faintly in his ears. He knew the path ahead would demand more than he had ever given. But he also knew there was no turning back. The days leading to the full moon weighed heavily on Thomas. He returned to his compound, but his heart remained in the forest hut. His wives noticed the change in him. He spoke less, ate little, and often sat awake deep into the night. Grace asked him once what troubled him, but he only shook his head. He could not tell her the truth, for how could she understand that the wombs of 4 women were not empty, but that his spirit was bound to the cries of dead children? On the evening of the full moon, Thomas prepared himself. He tied a small white cock with a rope, placed a calabash of palm oil under his arm, and carried a sharp blade hidden in cloth. His steps felt heavy as he left the compound. The villagers watched him pass but said nothing, though whispers rose after he was gone. Some believed he had gone to seek charms for a son, others thought madness was slowly eating him. None knew the truth. By the time Thomas reached the old battleground near the river, night had fallen. The moon was full, bathing the land in silver light. The place was silent, but Thomas could feel the weight of history in the soil. His father had fought here. Blood had soaked this ground long ago, and now it called him back. He placed the cock and the palm oil on the earth, then drew the blade across his own arm, letting drops of blood fall. The wind changed. It carried voices, soft at first, then louder, crying like children lost in the night. Thomas's knees trembled. He looked around and saw shadows rising from the ground, small figures with hollow eyes. The cries pierced his ears. They were not human, yet they were not far from it. Thomas knew at that moment that the oracle's words were true. He was standing before the souls who carried his shame. The cries grew louder, circling Thomas as the moon shone brighter over the battleground. His breath came in quick bursts as he tried to steady himself. The shadows of children moved closer, their hands reaching out like smoke. Their eyes glowed faintly, empty yet filled with pain. Thomas's heart pounded as he knelt on the blood-stained soil, unsure whether to speak or run. Suddenly, one of the shadows stepped forward. It was smaller than the rest, its voice softer but sharper, like a knife cutting through silence. "Why do you call us?" it asked, though its lips never moved. Thomas froze, his skin prickling with fear. He wanted to turn away, but the oracle's command echoed in his mind, "You must face them. You must give them what they were denied." "I want a child," Thomas whispered, his voice breaking. "I want a son to carry my name." The shadows murmured among themselves, their cries twisting into a strange chorus of laughter and sorrow. The small one stepped closer again. "You want a child," it said, "but your father took ours. His hand spilled blood in this very place. We were never buried. We were never named. We were forgotten." The words struck Thomas like a heavy stone. His father had fought in the war, but he had never spoken of the lives he ended. Now those lives stood before his son, demanding remembrance. "What must I do?" Thomas asked, tears filling his eyes. His voice shook, but his body remained kneeling, bound by the weight of their presence. The small figure raised its head toward the moon. "Blood for blood, name for name. Give us rest, and we will give you a future. Refuse, and your line will end forever." Thomas bowed his head, his tears mixing with his blood on the soil. He knew then that the price for a son would be heavier than he had ever imagined. Thomas trembled as the voices surrounded him. The children's shadows swayed in the moonlight, their faces shifting between sorrow and anger. He could feel their hunger, not for food, but for something deeper, for peace, for justice, for the life that had been stolen from them. His chest tightened as he realized the choice before him. If he turned back, his shame would remain forever. If he went forward, he would have to stain his hands with blood. The small figure spoke again, its voice echoing inside his skull. "Bring us blood of your flesh, blood of your house. Only then shall the chain be broken." Thomas's heart sank. Did they mean his wives? Did they mean someone from his family? He shook his head violently. "No, not them," he cried. "They have suffered enough." But the shadows only grew louder, their cries piercing the night like drums of war. Suddenly, Thomas felt a burning sensation on his arm where he had cut himself. The blood dripping to the soil glowed faintly, spreading into the earth. From it rose more shadows, smaller and weaker, as though his blood had given them voice. Thomas fell back in fear, clutching his chest. He realized then that he could not escape. His bloodline itself was bound to these spirits. Tears streamed down his face. "If it must be my blood, then take it from me," he whispered. "But spare my wives. Spare them." The shadows paused, their cries softening. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the air. Then the small figure answered, its tone cold and final. "Not enough. Your life alone cannot pay for many lives. You must choose. Either carry their cries forever, or give blood from your house to balance the earth." Thomas sank to his knees, his heart shattering. The night grew colder, and the weight of a decision too heavy for any man pressed upon his soul. Thomas staggered from the clearing at dawn, his body weak, his mind torn apart. The cries of the children still echoed in his ears, following him even as he tried to leave them behind. His hands shook as he clutched the rope of the cock, which now hung lifelessly at his side. The sacrifice he had made was not enough. The spirits had spoken, they demanded more, and until he answered, they would not release him. When he returned to the compound, his wives rushed to meet him. Grace touched his arm gently. "Where have you been, my husband? We feared something had happened." But Thomas pulled away, his eyes hollow. He could not tell them what he had seen, not yet. Their faces, filled with hope and worry, only deepened his torment. How could he ever choose one of them for blood? That night, Thomas could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw the hollow faces of the children, their hands reaching for him. The words of the small shadow repeated like a curse, blood for blood, name for name. His heart pounded as he thought of Obina. The old man had known all along. Perhaps he alone could explain what the spirits meant. At sunrise, Thomas went to Obina's hut. The elder was already outside, grinding herbs with slow, steady hands. He looked up as Thomas approached, his eyes calm but sharp. "You have seen them," Obina said, as though reading his thoughts. Thomas fell to his knees. "They demand blood of my house. Tell me, must I give them my wives?" Obina sighed, his wrinkled face heavy with sorrow. "The spirits do not lie. They ask for what was taken. But the choice is yours. You can carry their cries until your death, or you can pay the price and open the way for a son." Thomas buried his face in his hands, torn between love and legacy. For the first time in his life, he wished he had been born without the strength that others envied. For many days, Thomas avoided his wives. He ate little, spoke less, and often stayed outside the compound until nightfall. His silence worried them, but none dared press him too much. They thought perhaps he was burdened by shame again, or that he had gone to seek another healer in secret. Only Grace, the youngest, sometimes sat quietly by his side, her eyes searching his face for an answer she could not find. The cries never left him. They came even in daylight, faint whispers that only he could hear. In the market, among the noise of traders, he heard them. On the farm, while cutting yam, he heard them. At night, they grew louder, surrounding his bed like invisible chains. His body grew weaker, his eyes sunken, but his heart still resisted the spirit's demand. He loved his wives, each in her own way. To sacrifice one of them felt like a sin worse than death. One evening, as the moon rose, Thomas returned to Obina's hut once more. "Elder," he said, his voice hoarse, "there must be another way. Tell me, is there no sacrifice that does not involve my wives?" Obina looked at him for a long time, then shook his head. "Blood answers only to blood. The sins of your father cannot be washed with herbs or prayers. If you refuse, you will grow old and die with no heir. Your name will vanish." Thomas clenched his fist until his nails dug into his palms. "Then why me? Why must I suffer for what my father did?" Obina's gaze did not waver. "Because you were chosen before birth. You carry his blood, and with it, his death." Thomas staggered back, his heart heavy as iron. The path before him was clear, yet it was darker than anything he had ever imagined. For the first time, he wondered if having a son was worth the price the spirits demanded. The days grew heavier, and the silence in Thomas's compound became unbearable. His wives felt the distance in his heart but could not reach him. Mary, the eldest, once asked softly, "Have we offended you, my husband?" Thomas only shook his head, unable to meet her eyes. Ruth stopped cooking his favorite meals, for he no longer ate. Anna spent her nights awake, whispering prayers into the darkness. Grace still tried to comfort him, but even she began to feel the weight of his silence. The spirits did not give him rest. On the 12th night, they came stronger than before. He woke to find the cries shaking his compound, loud enough that he thought the entire village would hear. The shadows of children filled his hut, their hollow eyes glowing in the dark. They surrounded his bed, their hands reaching, their voices sharp. "Choose," they demanded. "Blood for blood, name for name." Thomas fell to the floor, clutching his ears, begging them to leave. "Spare me. Spare my house," he cried. But the voices only grew louder. The small figure stepped forward again. "You are the vessel. If you refuse, you will carry us until your body breaks, and your name will rot with you." At dawn, when the shadows finally faded, Thomas lay weak on the ground. His wives found him trembling, his lips dry, his eyes staring blankly. They tried to help him rise, but he pushed them away. Inside him, a war raged. He wanted to protect them, yet he also feared dying with no heir, no son to carry his name. That day, he made a decision he could not speak aloud. He would return to the battleground one last time. And there, under the moon, he would decide whether to obey the spirits or defy them. The night of decision came sooner than Thomas expected. The moon hung round and heavy in the sky, casting a pale light over the land. Thomas rose quietly from his bed, careful not to wake his wives. He wrapped himself in a dark cloth, his face lined with sorrow. In his hand, he carried a calabash of palm oil and a sharp knife, the same blade he had used before. His steps were slow, but his heart beat fast as he walked toward the river battleground. When he reached the clearing, the air grew cold, and the cries began again, louder than ever. The shadows rose from the soil, filling the night with their sorrow. The small figure stepped forward, its voice sharp and endless. "You have come again, vessel of our cries. Tonight, you must choose." Thomas's knees weakened, but he stood tall. "I cannot give my wives," he said, his voice trembling. "I cannot spill their blood." The shadows murmured, their cries rising in anger. The small one hissed, "Then you will suffer until you die, and your name will vanish." Thomas raised the knife, pressing it to his chest. "If blood must be given, then let it be mine. Take me, but leave them." His words cut through the night like fire. The shadows grew silent, their cries fading into a deep hush. For a moment, Thomas thought they would accept his offer. Then the small figure spoke again, its voice colder than the grave. "Your blood is not enough. You were chosen to carry us, not to die for us. One of your house must pay, or the chain will remain." Thomas's arm trembled, the knife slipping from his grasp. He fell to his knees, his tears soaking the soil. The choice still hung over him like a sword, heavier than death itself. Thomas remained on his knees, his body shaking as the shadows circled him. Their cries rose and fell like waves, crashing against his soul. He pressed his hands to the ground, his tears mixing with the soil of the battleground. "How can I choose?" he cried. "How can I take the life of one I love, just to give life to another?" His voice echoed, but the spirits gave no mercy. The small figure stepped closer, its hollow eyes burning like coals. "We are many," it whispered, "and our blood was never buried. We were robbed of mothers, robbed of names. Your father's sword gave us death, and his bloodline owes us peace." The other shadows wailed in agreement, their cries rattling the trees. Thomas's chest felt as though it would burst. He understood now, his father's sins had not ended with the war. They had been carried into him, binding his manhood, turning his life into a vessel of sorrow. In that moment, Thomas felt rage rising inside him. He stood, his voice shaking but firm. "If you demand blood from my house, then curse me instead. Take my strength, take my body, but I will not spill the blood of my wives. They are innocent. They do not deserve to suffer for what they did not cause." The shadows hissed, their shapes twisting violently, but the small figure raised its hand, and they grew still. "You are stubborn," it said, its voice echoing with both sorrow and respect. "Few men would defy us so. You have chosen your house over your name." The shadows began to fade into the night, their cries softening into whispers. But as they vanished, the small one gave a final warning. "The price is not gone. It will follow you, Thomas Okeke. Your house may remain, but your name will bleed until the debt is paid." Thomas stood alone in the clearing, the knife at his feet, his heart broken but unshaken. He had made his choice, but he knew the battle was far from over. Thomas returned to the village before dawn, his body weary but his spirit heavy. His wives rushed to him, their eyes filled with questions, but he said nothing. He simply held them, drawing strength from their warmth, even as he wondered how long he could protect them from the curse that still lingered. The night's whispers clung to him like smoke, and he knew the story was not yet ended. The elders gathered later that day, demanding to know if he had fulfilled the rite. Thomas stood before them, his head unbowed. "I faced the spirits," he said, "and I chose life. I will not sacrifice my wives for a debt that does not belong to them." Gasps filled the gathering, and the eldest among them shook his head in sorrow. Then the curse will live with you, the man said. And your house will carry its mark until the spirits themselves are satisfied. Days turned into weeks, and Thomas lived in a silence broken only by the laughter of his wives and the watchful eyes of the villagers. They whispered that he was cursed beyond saving, that his house would wither. Yet, despite the shame, he felt a strange strength. He had chosen love over fear, and though the shadows haunted him, he no longer bowed to them. But the curse did not die. At night, Thomas often woke to the sound of children's cries, faint and distant, as if carried on the wind. Sometimes, he felt cold hands press against his chest, reminding him of the spirit's warning. Still, he held fast to his vow, guarding his wives and living each day as if it were borrowed. The story of Thomas spread across the villages, told in whispers around fires. Some said he was a fool who defied the spirits and doomed his line. Others said he was a man of great courage, who chose love in the face of impossible judgment. And so his name lived on, not in songs, but in the tale of the man who stood against the shadows of his father's sins. And even now, when the wind carries the sound of distant cries, the villagers say it is the spirits calling, reminding the living that the deaths of the past are never truly buried.